So the big news today is that Elon's finally being vocal about his dissatisfaction with this big, beautiful spending bill because it doesn't take into account any of the spending cuts he found with Doge. And this is sort of a thing that we're starting to see, right? People are being more concerned with the debt and the deficit. A few people, at least,
A
not
few
everybody.
people. I'm actually looking at this. I'm looking at this video clip somebody just sent me about Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, talking about now what's clearly public disagreement between Trump and Musk, and saying he's not delighted that Elon did a 180. I don't think that
Did
Elon did a
Elon do a
180.
180? Yeah, I
I
was
don't
going to
think that
say.
Elon did a 180. I think that Elon was pretty clear from the beginning that he thought the government shouldn't be spending so much money. And he went in and has been very consistent that the government shouldn't be spending so much money. And it's astonishing how much resistance he got on all fronts from both parties. Just, I mean, nobody, I mean, that you had the Democrats going and, storming the Department of Education. We got to save the, trying to push their way into the building because this guy wanted to do away with this. Then you got the other guys that go and pass the big, beautiful bill with $2 trillion in it, which I believe he called what was the quote, disgusting travesty.
Yeah, he said
And it
a
is.
disgusting abomination.
Abomination. Yes. Abomination.
Yeah. Filled with pork.
And it is. I mean, it's great. There's some tax cuts that are permanent. Like, I love tax cuts. Tax cuts are great, but it doesn't matter if you have just ridiculous, outrageous spending. And people, $2 trillion. It's a $2 trillion deficit, and people just go la 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 la. And it's amazing that so few people are taking it seriously. These people that are professional politicians, most people in Congress, most people in the Senate have been there for decades. They're supposed to be experts in budgetary processes and looking at, fiscal challenges and all these things. Like, they're supposed to be the experts. They have all the experience. It's not like there's a bunch of noobs. It's not like there's a bunch of guys. It's like their first day in government and they've never had to deal with any of this stuff before. They've been dealing with it forever. And they still haven't figured it out that, oh, geez, maybe we should live within our means. And that's just not even close to being on the table. And it's not a single party issue anymore.
Yeah. It's odd to me that people like the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, are coming out and criticizing people like Jamie Dimon, who you pointed out in an article the other day has been critical of this debt issue and saying this is going to be a problem, what this is going to lead to in terms of the bond markets and the cost of financing that debt. But Bessent was like, he's a finance guy. He's a smart guy. Do you think he actually believes what he's saying, that Jamie Dimon has made a lot of predictions that have never come true, so just don't even listen to this warning?
And he's made a lot of predictions that did come true. Let's be honest. I mean, Jamie Dimon's got a pretty great track record. I'm no fan of huge banks and all of that, but man, I mean, the guy's done it. It's hard to argue with that track record for somebody that's been in that position and that hot seat for as long as he has, and to have achieved as much success as he's had, to create as much shareholder value, to have a bank that's got, they call it their fortress balance sheet. He was talking about in this interview. Jamie Dimon, if you're not familiar, Jamie Dimon is the CEO of JP Morgan Chase. Okay, so this is the most successful bank, the largest bank, depending on how you slice it, on the planet. This guy's the CEO. He's been the CEO forever. He's been on the hot seat forever. It was actually kind of hilarious because he was talking about, these regulators come in and they say, oh, you got to do these stress tests. We're going to make you do these stress tests. And he's like, we do hundreds of stress tests a week. It's like, we are constantly what-ifing. What could go wrong? What might go wrong? What if this happens? What if that happens? And are we going to be able to survive that? Are we going to be able to uphold our utmost important mission, which is safeguard our customer deposits? That's mission number one for a bank. Are we going to be able to do that? We're stress testing. So now we got to go waste time to take our eye off the ball from our stress tests, which, by the way, are a lot more difficult than your stupid stress tests. And we're going to do your stress test because you're the regulator. This is a joke. Let us do our thing. And so this guy has been phenomenally successful. He gets finance, and he's saying, frankly, I'm quite heartened because it's the same view that we've had for so long, which is, number one, this is fixable, right? And I mean, we've been talking about that for a long time. This is fixable. The United States debt challenge is absolutely fixable, but nobody's doing anything about it. And the longer people don't do anything about it, the more difficult, the more painful, the more chaotic it becomes to fix. And you get to a certain point where after a time, it will become virtually impossible to fix without either some kind of economic miracle or a crisis. And we have to kind of define what that means. But this is something we've been talking about for a long time. Now I got Jamie Dimon talking about this, and Jamie Dimon goes on stage. The interesting thing is he was in a room. I wrote about this. He did this on Friday, and he's a room full of, it wasn't like just some conference. This is like the SEC chairman was there, Fed officials were there, Treasury officials were there. There are all these people in the room that are very prominent people. And this guy, he's pointing his finger by, saying, you've got to take this seriously. You've got to fix this. And they're not doing it. Congress goes and they go, oh, look, the big, beautiful bill. And, Elon rightfully says a bill can be big, but it can be beautiful, but it can't be both. And he's right. Very seldom is there any legislation that could be described as beautiful. There's no, I mean, when has anybody woken up in the morning and said, man, I hope the federal government passes a law today. That's going to make my life so much better. It's just literally never happened. I guarantee you, everybody that's listening to this, it's never happened unless you're like a government contractor or something like that. You're somebody that just rakes money in from the taxpayer. Maybe that's what you do for a living. And aside from that, no regular person kicks their heels together in a fit of joy and says, I'm so happy they passed this legislation. Nobody has ever described a law as beautiful. It's a joke. And all these guys just sitting around deluding each other into this belief that a $2 trillion deficit is somehow a good thing for America. It's a complete and utter farce.
Well, and some of them are even just denying the reality that it is a $2 trillion deficit. It honestly reminds me of the Democrats. They'll just, no, it's not going to be a $2 trillion deficit when it clearly is. And then they take aim at some of the best people in Congress, Thomas Massey in the House and Rand Paul in the Senate. I'm like, these are
what was the
most rational people.
It's like when you remember when Pelosi did that, and she closed her thumb and her index finger together, and she said it costs zero. I can't remember what she was even talking about.
She was talking about the. I think she was talking about a giant spending.
Yeah, it was one of those giant spending bills. I don't remember if it was like one of their Green New Deal or whatever it was, but she was like, it costs zero. It costs zero. And I mean, it's that kind of thing where they just convince it like, no, it's fine. There's nothing to see here, right? And it's for so long, nobody ever wanted to say anything about it. And now there's finally, I would say, a growing chorus of some very prominent people. You've got people like Jamie Dimon, CEO of the largest, important, the most important financial institution in the entire financial system, not just in the US, in the world. And the CEO of that bank, Jamie Dimon, is saying, this is a problem. You got to fix it. This is going to be a 5-alarm fire. What do you say? I don't know if it's going to be a problem. And I don't know if it's going to be a crisis in 6 months or 6 years, but it's going to be a problem. It's going to be a major deal. Then you got Ray Dalio, one of the richest guys on the planet. Another guy, has made billions of dollars in finance, saying this is going to be a huge problem. He calls it a heart attack, and says, same thing, like 4 years, I don't know, plus or minus a year. You got Elon Musk, the richest guy in the world, saying like this is a huge problem. This is an abomination. $2 trillion. Like, I mean, he was saying before the election, I just want to make sure America doesn't go broke. This is a huge problem. You have some congressmen, you've got some senators that have summoned the courage to stand up and do what's right. And yet they're being vilified now, including by their own party. Their own party, which is supposed to be the responsible financial stewards, the guys who like tax cuts, but also like spending cuts, the guys who are supposed to be deficit hawks and fiscal conservatives and all that, are saying, shut up, Rand Paul, sit down. We're going to primary you because you don't want to have a $2 trillion deficit. What's the matter with you, man? It's hard to see this. It really is. It's very, very disheartening. And I mean, Elon Musk must feel like he just got kicked in the balls.
I know, to have spent $250 million. Nobody can seriously claim that he's got Trump derangement syndrome. This isn't a guy that's against everything that Trump has ever done and just wants to, oppose it all. He was all on board. I think he's frustrated that they took all his Doge recommendations and said, oh, great, thanks. Now
just
we're going to
wad it up and threw it in the trash, slam dunked it, Michael Jordan style, right into the waste bin. And said, let's have a $2 trillion deficit.
Yeah. And it's not even the $250 million he donated. It's the time that he took to pour money into this Doge project while his other companies are suffering. And his own reputation is suffering.
Blowing up Tesla dealerships because the guy's trying to save money.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
right. And then all the people.
Astonishing. It's astonishing.
It's suddenly nobody thinks there's any waste in government, and they don't think that, that we need to cut a single dime. If you had asked them, 2
You
months
spend
before Trump,
trillions of dollars a year on Medicare and Social Security, and people go, there's not a single dollar of that could possibly be wasted. It's like, how does anybody say this stuff with a straight face? And honestly, I gotta imagine if you're the Chinese and you're looking at this and you're like, you have the richest guy in the world. I mean, imagine you're Xi Jinping, right? And you look at this going, you have the richest guy in the world that's using his own money, his own time, his own reputation to try and save the government from doing things that are extremely sensible. And he's being fought left and right. The media, the people, individuals blowing up his companies, blowing up Tesla dealerships because they can't acknowledge the basic truth that there's tremendous amounts of waste and fraud in the government. And if you're an adversary country and you look at this, like, this is insane. They couldn't have planned this. They couldn't have asked for anything better than this, and I'm surprised. And like, I mean, I had a lot of, talk about stress tests. I mean, I had a number of scenarios in my head, a lot of things that I've been thinking about over the years. And I was saying this, I was saying this 6 months ago. There's people saying, no, Elon's not gonna be able to do anything. And I remember thinking, like, come on, the guy that catches rocket ships with metal chopsticks isn't gonna be able to find some money to cut. And he did. He found plenty of money to cut. What he wasn't banking on, well, I don't think a whole lot of people were banking on, was the fact that he would find so much resistance from everybody. Because people talk about spending because they go, of course they like spending cuts. But as long as it's not anything that's like important to them, you know. We talked about this on because Bissett was on one of these Sunday morning shows like Face the Nation or Meet the Press, one of these, and obviously all those people. I mean, they're the reporters on those shows, the journalists. I mean, they're just communists, anyways. I mean, they're hardcore far left activists masquerading as journalists. And they go in and they ask Bissett, and Bissett's insisting, no, the deficit's going to be lower. The deficit's going to be lower. And it's like, how do you say that with a straight face? It's $2 trillion. It was $1.8 trillion last year. It's going to be $2 trillion now. It was the deficit for the first 6 months of FY25, fiscal year 2025, was $1.3 trillion in the first 6 months. Right. So, I mean, you're on track for a $2.6 trillion deficit this year. And that's before your big, beautiful bullshit. So what's going to happen? I mean, it's an unfathomable number. Everybody acknowledges, even the Treasury Department's own forecast, that they're going to spend way more on interest than they're going to spend on the military this year. I mean, it's unbelievable. And she's talking to Scott Bessent, and she's like, no, the deficit's going to be lower. I don't know how somebody could say that with a straight face. If you look at it like, well, relative to GDP, it's going to be higher. Relative to tax revenue, it's going to be higher. Relative to anything you can think of, it's going to be higher. Relative to last year, it's going to be higher. And so they brought on the same show right after that. They brought on Rand Paul. And they said, well, what do you think, Rand Paul? And Rand Paul said, that guy's math doesn't add up. The math doesn't add up. The deficit's going to be higher. Rand Paul's talking about this stuff. But here you've got now the media, which bizarrely still has such a prominent outsized role in establishing and setting the national conversation. And there is they're not willing to have a national conversation about the deficit, right? And so she starts just lighting this guy up. What about Sesame Street? What about Sesame Street? You want to cut NPR? You want to cut PBS? What about Sesame Street? And it's like, that's the hill you're going to die on?
The taxpayers need to pay for a children's Muppet show.
Well, and that's what Rand Paul says. He goes, I just don't think that the government needs to be involved in children's television programming. And he's right. He's right. Because one of the most SpongeBob SquarePants didn't come from the mind of a government bureaucrat. One of the most popular people on YouTube is that kid Ryan. The kid makes like freaking $30 million a year, opening up boxes of toys, and little kids love it. That didn't come from the government. There's no government funding went into the YouTube's pocket, went into that kid's pocket. I mean, it's unbelievable. Right. It's unbelievable that, and you have the reporters. You have the reporters that want to insist on this trope of the government has to be involved in all these things, and we can't cut this, we can't cut this. Because what about the children? What about Sesame Street? Well, Netflix went and they bought the rights to Sesame Street, man. So you can't use Sesame Street as an excuse anymore. You can't use any of this stuff as an excuse, because people are all for government spending cuts. They're all for balanced budgets, but everybody's got their thing. Everybody has their individual thing. For whatever the reporter's name, she's like, for her, it's Sesame Street. For somebody else, I was actually reading this article from this very outspoken academic who was railing against government deficits. In the same article, he was railing against the Trump administration for cutting funding to academic research. So it's like the view is everybody else's thing needs to be cut except for my thing. And that's why there's no spending cuts.
Same thing this morning. I saw this weatherman in Florida went on air and he was railing against the cuts to NOAA and the Hurricane Watch Center. And he's saying, I'm not going to be able to accurately predict the hurricanes this year. This is a private weatherman. That's his job. And he's saying, without the government's plane flying around the hurricanes, there's just nothing we can do to predict the hurricanes. We're all going to die.
Isn't that ridiculous? I mean, this guy essentially goes on live TV and admits that he has no function or purpose in his life whatsoever. Right. Basically, I'm just a stooge who stands up here and just repeats what the government agency puts out.
Right. Like, and on the other side of it, you've talked about
you're just begging to be fired.
Right. You've also talked about the other side of it, where the government agencies are repeating the job that the private sector does better with the statistics, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, where they're putting out reports that the private sector is already putting out, except for like 10x the price and with worse data.
Yeah, I mean, the ADP report just came out, and so now the Bureau of Labor Statistics is going to spend, $1 billion of taxpayer funds to come up with worse data in a less efficient way that takes them a lot longer. And we know this is true because these government agencies, when they compile these economic statistics, they're constantly going back and say, oh, we have to revise what we did 3 months ago. We have to revise the numbers we put out last month. It's like, they never get it right. They go, here's the unemployment rate. Oh, next month. Just kidding. The unemployment numbers that we put out. No, we got to revise those. We got to revise them up. We got to revise them down. It's like, why don't we just rely on the private sector numbers? Because ADP actually has like all the data. These guys essentially dominate the payroll market in the United States. So they know how many new people are coming on. They know how many people are getting let go. They know how many people are employed in the marketplace. I mean, it's so obvious. It's so obvious that there's so many of these areas that can very clearly be cut.
And Jamie Dimon was saying that with the low-hanging fruit too, right? What was he saying that could easily the United States could do in terms of solving this problem?
Well, he talks about it from the same way that we do. He said it is solvable, and there's a couple of ways to go about it. Ideally, you hit both cases. Number one is you got to cut spending. Who's going to be dumb enough to say, oh, there's no spending cuts that can be made? There's no waste. Come on. I mean, the government itself, under the Biden administration, came out with his estimate of how much trillions of dollars of government waste there was, and all of a sudden, people on both sides want to go, no, there's no way, there's no waste. We can't cut anything. So of course you got to cut those wastes. You got to prioritize. You've got to actually start over and say, what is the function of government? We told this story once a long time ago. It was several episodes ago we did. And I was talking about my grandmother. I said, my grandmother opened a beauty salon in this would have been in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. She didn't have a cosmetology license. She didn't go and get permits, whatever. They had a piece of land. And my grandfather, with his bare hands and his hand tools, built her a little place. And my grandmother went out and put out her little shingle and said, oh, yeah, come here and get your hair done. Come here and get your nails done. And ladies from all over their little town in Oklahoma went to her place and they got their hair done. They got her nails done. My grandmother built a successful business. You can't do that anymore. And what we said is freedom is like inflation. You lose a little bit every year. Inflation means you lose purchasing power every year. You lose some of your freedom every year. And it's not like just 1 year they just passed this law and said, thou shalt not be able to do this without a cosmetology license. It didn't happen, right? There was no beautiful legislation that prevented people from starting their businesses whenever they wanted to. It happened over years, decades, little laws, little rules, little regulations, new government agencies that pop up, little by little. All of a sudden you look back, and now I can tell this story about my grandmother saying, oh yeah, she started this without a license, whatever. And people go, that's crazy. It's like these historical anecdotes that just seem incomprehensible to us right now, because obviously anybody who's in those kinds of businesses, God help you if you want to start a restaurant, especially in the state of California. What did you used to need to be able to have? You needed a stove. You needed a pan, you needed some plates and dishes and stuff. Now you need all these things.
I mean, I just got back from Vietnam, and what do you need in Vietnam, in this communist country, to start a business is a little piece of the sidewalk and a stove to grill stuff on, and you're a street vendor now. And so it is pretty ironic when you look at these developing countries and you say, is there more opportunity in Vietnam today than there is in America to actually start from the bottom and build your way up?
I was having a conversation with somebody the other day. I mean, it's a as they say in that part of the world, same but different. It's that we were talking about we do, obviously in our premium investment publications we talk a lot about resource companies, mining companies, and again there's a lot of these that are just wildly profitable right now but very undervalued. And I was talking with a guy and we were talking about jurisdiction, that a lot of these companies they operate in different places around the world. And as a Westerner, a lot of people, it's kind of hard coded in their DNA that anything outside of my country is inherently risky and dangerous and all this kind of stuff. And so people feel like they got to take jurisdiction risk, right? Because they're going to go to some place somewhere else in the world, whatever. And we were kind of joking. It's like what people don't realize is like one of the most threatening jurisdictions you could do business in, especially that sector, is in the United States. And we were swapping stories about some companies, and it's state by state, especially a lot of these. But I mean, we're swapping stories about some companies that have been in permitting. Mining companies have been in permitting in the United States for a decade, 20 years to be in a permitting process to drill and mine a critical resource that the country needs. And all the bureaucrats get in on it. And so it's the same kind of thing. I mean, you used to not be able to have to do that, and somebody could say, "Well, you got to have something." Fine, like, but that's the whole point, is that the government's got to go back, and it's not just at the federal level; it's at the state level, it's at the local level. There's got to be somebody's got to just smash the reset button across all government and say, we've got to have a conversation about what do we actually want government to be. Is the government supposed to do all of these things, whatever, or are we going to put our big boy pants on and say, we're just going to take a fucking chance and prominent, talented individuals do their thing, let productive people do their thing, let productive businesses do their thing, and we'll yeah, sure, we'll deal with some consequences. But on the other hand, you got 20 years to get a permit for something, or again, God help you want to start a restaurant, or just go and start braiding people's hair, doing people's nails. The kind of bureaucratic hoops that you have to jump through now is absolutely astonishing. And
And
it's
I
the kind of
think
thing you don't have to deal with in a lot of other countries.
and this is one of the things that you talk about being really the only viable solution that doesn't hurt the economy is embracing capitalism, embracing that growth so much that the economy grows at a speed that the problems with the deficit and the debt actually melt away. Because what's the other consequence of that? Like, what are these the chorus of
Well,
people that are starting to warn
let's
about it?
let's talk about that for a minute, because there's two ways to go about it, right? Number one is, how do you fix the problem? Number one is, you've got to cut spending. Number two is, you have to boost growth. Well, that's not really the government's job, right? The government isn't supposed to, let's invest in this sector. I mean, this is what people talk about all the time. We're going to invest in green technology, and they start shoveling, debt fueled, taxpayer funds into certain sectors, and you end up with, Solyndra and all these just companies end up going nowhere and going bust. The government should be involved in any of that stuff. The government should just get the hell out of the way and let the private sector figure it out and do its thing. And the low hanging fruit is that in the United States, and what's supposed to be the wealthiest, most advanced, most developed, most dynamic economy on the planet, 2% growth is considered this like big deal, slapping themselves on the back in government if they can achieve 2% growth. 2% is a joke. It's a joke. 2% is a joke. The US should be growing leaps and bounds with all of the talent, all of the smart people, all the smart businesses, all the technology, all the vast pool of capital that's there. The US should be growing so much faster. And so they've sort of set their sights so low that they're like, oh, let's see if we can get to 2%. We got 1.8%. So close. It's like, man, like, if you're not getting like 3.5, you should be hanging your head in shame for not being able to achieve 3.5% growth. Right. And so that's part of the problem. And Jamie Dimon was talking about this. He said, man, just regulatory reform alone, just liberate, you talk about Liberation Day. Liberation Day should have been the day that the president of the United States says, you know what, here's, this, like, there's so many government regulations, you could fill a freaking football stadium. Liberation Day should have been the day they set fire to all those stupid regulations. We talked about some of them. I mean, I'll really look some of these up. There's a one we were talking about one time about like there's a regulation about like if the there cannot be a sexual odor to swine carcass, and if there's a sexual odor to swine carcass, then it's not eligible for sale. I mean, all this is like it's like, dude, this pages and pages of regulations and stuff, and every single day. You can look this up yourself. If you go to websites, it's called the Federal Register. I think it's federalregister.gov. We look at this all the time. Every single day, there is an edition, 5 days a week, except for national holidays. There's a new edition of the Federal Register. It's a compendium of all the new rules and regulations, new proposed rules, rules that went into effect, all this stuff every single day. And sometimes it goes into hundreds of pages a day, 70, 80,000 pages a year of new regulation, not repealing old stuff, new regulations. You cannot have a dynamic, productive economy when you're adding 70,000 pages a year of new regulations. Liberation Day should have been, hey, you know what? We're gonna set fire to all of this. Like that was a terrible impression. Liberation Day should have been setting fire to all the hundreds of thousands, millions of pages of rules and regulations to liberate productive people and American businesses from all of that just absurd, pointless, costly, expensive government oversight. And that's how you get the economy moving. That's how you get the economy moving. Another way Jamie Dimon was talking about was like immigration reform. You got some of the smartest, most talented people in the world who want to move to this country. They want to start jobs. They want to invest. They want to bring capital. They want to do all these things, and you don't let them do it because your immigration system is incomprehensibly just stupid. It's inefficient. It takes forever. It's like, oh, you let millions of people waltz across the border, and then you give them free benefits and all this stuff, but you don't let these super well educated entrepreneurial guys actually come and work in the system and pay taxes and all this stuff.
You don't let the college students who graduate from American universities stay here and get a job.
Yeah, let's suck all the knowledge out of the United States and then send them back to their home country. That's it. Like what? Well, that is genius. That is just genius level stuff. I mean, who comes up with this asinine policy? And it's like the craziest thing is that everybody knows you could go to Washington, D.C., you wander around Congress and just poll people and say, what do you think about the immigration system? And people go, oh, it sucks. It needs to be reformed. Doesn't matter what party they're from. Doesn't matter their tenure. Everybody says it sucks. Great. Why haven't you done anything? Well, and it's like spending cuts. It's one of these things that like everybody knows it's got to get done. Doesn't happen. It just never happens, And so these are things like, it's just the low hanging fruit. That's ways to get the economy going. And then that's before you get into like, hey, let's embrace nuclear power. Let's embrace nuclear power and have super clean energy, ridiculously cheap, that powers all these things in the future. And then we got robotics and AI and all this stuff. Like, yeah, man, shit, like you're going to be growing at 6% a year. Easy, 6% a year. Right. And so that goes a long way in solving your problem if you actually achieve economic growth. And you don't have to worry about spending cuts really at that point. But you do now because you're smothering and suffocating the private economy with all these idiotic rules and regulations. And so, yeah, you gotta come at it from the spending cut angle, and nobody wants to do it. And the part that I would lament is that I'll go back to this reporter challenging Rand Paul about Sesame Street. Right. So it's one of these things that the legacy media still has a bizarrely outsized role in setting the national conversation. And when you think about all the other things that they've shoved down our throats over the past several years, everybody's got to get vaccinated. Everybody's got to mask up. Everybody's got to sit in their basement and cower in fear. Black Lives Matter, blah, blah, blah. This is all these things. What bathroom is this person allowed to use versus that? There was, think about how much more of a national conversation there has been about transgender bathrooms than about the national debt, than about the $2 trillion budget deficit. There was so much more, and has been so much more to this day. There's more attention on bathrooms and trans
and how many people does that affect?
Right. How many trans people are there in the United States versus how many people are going to be adversely affected by a $2 trillion budget deficit and the consequences that come from that? Everybody in America, plus all the people in the world that use U.S. dollars and rely on the United States. I mean, you're talking about a impact that goes at like the impact crater on economic problems in the United States goes into the billions of people around the world. But you know what? These people are far more fixated on Sesame Street on who gets to use what bathroom, who gets to play in what sport. I mean, it's unbelievable the lack of attention that this matter is getting. And we're just now finally starting to see, to your point, a little bit of traction. Jamie Dimon, Ray Dalio, Elon Musk, some of these guys that are finally starting to get, say like, no, like this is a big deal. The media doesn't want to hear it. Most people in Congress don't want to hear it. The president of the United States doesn't seem to want to hear it. I mean, a lot of people, voters don't seem to want to hear it, but you're starting to get a little bit of attention. Even like, I mean, the Wall Street Journal has these like little articles about the debt, and it's starting to be a problem. Some people are sounding the alarm bell. Like, well, you think 120% plus of GDP, like you think that might be a problem, Wall Street Journal? Yeah. How that's not on the front page every single freaking day, it kind of makes a joke of your publication.
Well, you were just talking about you were telling me about this Wall Street Journal article that you read yesterday or this morning, where the person was actually making fun of companies that were shilling gold coins. It was
Like,
it was
yeah,
basically saying that the only people paying attention to the deficit are the people shilling gold coins. Like the only reason that you should pay attention to the debt is because I want to sell you gold coins.
well, I mean, they start off with this thing back from 1972. They said, "Oh, Time Magazine published this in 1972, questioning is the U.S. going broke?" I'm looking at the thing right now, the magazine cover for Time back when people actually read that. Is the U.S. going broke in 1972? People have been saying this forever. Is the U.S. going broke? And so it was kind of this like, ha ha. People have been predicting something like this for a very long time. And then they sort of poked fun of this and said, "Oh yeah, it was the only people saying that were people that were selling gold coins in 1972." And you go, "Well, one of the important things you're forgetting to mention is that gold was the best performing asset of that entire decade. Like people that actually paid attention to that and bought gold coins in 1972 did extremely well. People that made fun of the people buying gold coins in 1972 lost their ass to inflation throughout the entire decade." And then it's like they said, "Oh well, it's like Ronald Reagan would made a big deal about the deficit, in the 1980s." Yeah, that's his job. That's what he was supposed to do. He was supposed to make a big deal about the deficit in the 1980s. And by the way, Reagan made a big deal about the deficit in the 1980s at a time when the deficit was only 3% of GDP, when the national debt was only 35% of GDP. Today, the deficit's like 6-7% of GDP. The national debt's 120% of GDP, and nobody's making a big deal about it at all. And it's crazy. But the reason why Reagan made such a big deal about it is people go, and this is what this reporter is saying. It's so intellectually dishonest, because their whole point is almost to say, well, people have been talking about this for a while and nothing's happened yet. And I looked and said, oh well, you were diagnosed with cancer a couple of years ago, but you're not dead yet. So I guess there's nothing to do here. There's nothing to talk about. I mean, this is the reason why there is no national conversation about the deficit, because people are so dismissive. Even people that are supposed to be experts, the expert journalists in the preeminent financial publications of the country, are so dismissive about this. People in Congress that are supposed to be the watchdogs of all are completely dismissive about this. And the point is, these guys talk about this, and the thing they're missing, they go, well, nothing's happened yet. Everything has happened. Are you not watching the bond market? Are you not watching what's happened to interest rates and bond yields? Are you not watching what's happening to the US dollar? Everything has happened. I mean, it's like somebody gets diagnosed some horrible disease and they're like wasting away before your eyes. And you go, well, he's not dead yet. So I guess we'll just wait until his funeral before we take any action. It's mind-boggling to see people who are arguably intelligent people who are so dismissive of what is obviously, it's an arithmetic problem. You don't need any special divine powers to predict. It's arithmetic, man. It's arithmetic. And so for people to be so dismissive of math it's just honestly astonishing. Like, sorry, go ahead.
This article also had that they compared it to the economic Y2K. And this was the other thing that you were telling me. You're like, Y2K, they actually did something about it. The computer programs.
Hold on, we gotta. This is gonna be people way too ago. It was Y2K. Y2K was something when back in my day, all the old timers remember when computers came. These things called computers came around, and they used to have the month, day, year, and the year was 2 digits. I remember playing on my dad's computer like in the 80s, and it was like the year was like 84, 85. It didn't say 1984, 1985. So the point is, when you hit the year 2000, something that would calculate the age of something. All of a sudden, you're not going like, you're not subtracting 1985 from 2000. You're subtracting 85 from 00. And so it's like it starts all over again. And people saying, oh, all the software is going to explode, all software is going to melt down. And some of that was a little bit over the top. But the point is, like, people are making enough of a deal about that years in advance that there were, like, the entire industry came together. There were software patches and updates and, all this stuff. I mean, honestly, like, Microsoft did it really well. I mean, Microsoft was like, no, we're fine. And they went into Windows, and, Windows had 4-digit years at that point, and it wasn't a problem because they fixed it. So a lot of people identified an issue years in advance before it became a crisis. And then the whole kind of software industry, they patched and they updated and they came up with solutions. They figured it out. And so when Y2K finally came around, there's no big deal. The clock struck January 1st, 2000, and the computers didn't melt down. People were projecting like Armageddon, and it didn't happen. They're like, the banks are going to go down. You won't get money from your ATM machine, all this stuff. And it didn't happen. But the reason it didn't happen was because people actually took action and made the updates and patches and dealt with it in a calm and rational way. Nobody's doing that with the deficit issue. Nobody's coming in and saying like, hey, we need to cut spending. You get it. Like you might be from the opposite party, but let's figure it out. Let's find some common ground. I'm sure we can come up with some cuts if we understand that this is a problem and take it seriously. It's not happening. It's just not happening. And that's, really the astonishing part. And again, you look at this stuff in the past, Reagan dealt with it, and Reagan was dealing with like 15% interest rates. That's a really, really big deal. It's a really, really big deal. They dealt with this when I was a kid in the 90s, watching Ross Perot run for president. Ross Perot made a big deal about it because interest rates are still higher back then. They're still paying, 8-9% interest, 10% interest on the government debt. The government debt was a lot lower, but because the interest rate was so high, they were concerned that the interest payments are going to overwhelm, tax revenue. And so what happened? And basically most of this century, since the early 2000s, interest rates have been nothing. They've been nothing. And so the government hasn't had to pay. I mean, if you go back to the late 1900s, I mean, people were paying, 6, 7, 8% all the time. And the government hasn't had to pay that in decades. Nobody in government really barely even remembers, hardly anybody in government who remembers having to pay 9% interest on a US government bond. And so what do? They ran up the debt to $36 trillion because they were able to borrow money at 1%, 2%, 3%. When you can borrow money at 1%, you don't care. And it forces upon you this just completely lackadaisical attitude. You have no discipline anymore because you can borrow money so cheap. You can borrow $1 trillion at 1%. It's like, big deal. $1 trillion at 1% costs you $10 billion a year. It's a rounding error for the government. $1 trillion. You go, oh, great. So they take $1 trillion and they just throw it everywhere and said, oh, who cares? They spend it. There's no discipline. Nobody exercises any discipline to say, are we going to get a return on investment? Is this a good use of taxpayer money? Because, hey, screw it. I'm borrowing at 1%. I don't care. You don't do that. You don't have that kind of that laissez-faire, that just a hands-off, I don't care attitude when you have to pay 10%, when you have to pay 9% interest, right? Because now he's like, man, this is expensive. And so now what's happened, they borrowed $36 trillion. Their interest rates are so low. Nobody ever thought through, are we getting any kind of return on investment on this money? Now interest rates are coming up. Now you're starting to see, 30-year past 5%. The 10-year is moving to 5%. Short-term rates are very high. And so your average interest rate is moving up very rapidly. And so you could see this easily within 12 months, 18 months, you're going to see average interest rates could easily be 5% on a national debt that at that point will probably be $40 trillion. So 40 trillion to 5%, that's $2 trillion a year just to pay interest. That's a massive, massive chunk of tax revenue, right? So much of your tax revenue is going just to pay interest. And then, oh, by the way, on top of that, then you got to pay Social Security and Medicare, the mandatory entitlements. That consumes all the rest of your tax revenue and more. So you're already having to borrow more money just to pay interest on the debt and your mandatory entitlement spending before you get to the military, before you get to your homeland security and your border control and your national parks and all that stuff. You already have to borrow money just to pay interest, Social Security, and Medicare. And that's a problem that Ray Dalio, Jamie Dimon, Elon Musk, Rand Paul, some of these senators, a couple of these congressmen, some of these guys actually see and they understand, and nobody else wants to talk about it. Not the Wall Street Journal, not, people on NBC, on Meet the Press or whatever. Nobody wants to talk about it. And that's the reason why we end up in this situation where nothing ever gets done about it until you basically reach a crisis.
Right. So you reach that crisis, and then people start talking about it. Is that what it takes to force politicians into doing what needs to be done? Because I mean,
Nothing
unless
happens
they
until there's a
unless
crisis.
unless they're going to get voted out of office, they're just not going to
Right.
move.
Politicians will do what voters demand or what they perceive voters will demand. And voters aren't demanding any kind of fiscal responsibility. So, I mean, and that's not going to happen because, to be frank, voters are ignorant. They don't understand that. I mean, they might understand conceptually, like, well, the debt seems pretty high, but they don't understand what it means. They don't understand that this super high debt means that ultimately, the U.S. government most likely won't default, but they'll have to commandeer the Federal Reserve. They'll essentially have to nationalize the Federal Reserve and have the Federal Reserve come in and just print all that money. That's extremely inflationary. There's going to be lots and lots and lots of inflation, which means that people are going to be far worse off unless you're thinking about this stuff now and kind of investing for it and putting some money away and setting yourself up for that kind of trajectory. Most people are going to get caught off guard, and their standing of living is going to get much worse as a result of this. But most people don't understand that stuff. So they get focused on a lot of these symbolic things. And yeah, it's important, let's keep men out of women's sports and let's, do this and do that and all that stuff. I'm like, that's great. But the one problem that affects everybody alive in the country, or everybody that uses dollars, everybody that relies on the United States, and again, that impact crater is billions of people. That issue is simply overspending, the fiscal imbalances in the United States, $36 trillion debt, $2 trillion deficit. That's the problem. It affects billions of people and literally everybody in the United States. And nobody's taking it seriously. I'm going to say nobody, only a very, very small handful of people. And the hope is that those people are prominent enough, Jamie Dimon, richest guy in the world, handful of senators, that they're prominent enough that it elevates it to the point that there's a national conversation, that at least it's more of a national conversation than who gets to use which bathroom, which has been way more loud of a national conversation than the deficit. And maybe finally the deficit becomes enough of a priority that politicians perceive, hey, this is a big deal. Voters want me to do something about this. And maybe I should finally do it. I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm not holding my breath. And I feel like, the track record in the United States is that, basically when there's a crisis or there's about to be a crisis, that's when they'll finally take action. Social Security is a great example, by the way. The board of trustees of Social Security put out a report every single year and say, this trust fund, Social Security's primary trust fund, is going to run out of money in a couple of years, right? 8 years, 7 years, 9 years, whatever. But I mean, we're well within that striking distance. And they say it's going to run out of money. And if nothing's done, then there's going to be an immediate, significant benefit cut to every single Social Security beneficiary. And it's just going to get worse over time. Is anybody doing anything about this? No. Joe Biden said he wasn't going to do anything about it. Donald Trump said he wasn't going to do anything about it. Both parties said they weren't going to do anything about it. Nobody's willing to do anything about it. So what's going to happen? Around 2030, 2031, this thing's, 2032, this program's going to run out of money. Then it's going to be a crisis. Then everybody in Washington's going to, oh, we got to do something about this. Maybe it happens a year or two before it runs out of money, but it's going to get reached the point where it's a crisis or it's pre-crisis. It's right about to become a crisis, and then they'll do something about it. And then it'll be a Band-Aid, kick the can down the road solution. That's generally, how the U.S. government does business.
Their solutions are going to be, it's going to be the same for the debt crisis as well, right? Basically, just have the Federal Reserve print more money.
That's pretty much their only option. You're going to see certain things. You're going to see, they go, well, they're going to, I think you're probably going to see them try and commandeer private savings, whether coercively or voluntarily. I think you're probably going to see like patriot bonds, like war bonds in World War II. You're going to have, freaking DiCaprio and I don't know, Logan Paul or whatever are going to go out, and whoever the kind of famous guys are for Gen Z, whatever, these guys are going to go out and encourage people, to buy these U.S. government bonds, essentially subsidize the debt by accepting a sub-market, subpar yield when the yield should be 12%. They go, oh, buy these bonds, and they yield 2%. And so they're going to try and go and get everybody to refinance the debt, with your IRAs and your 401ks, and get corporate treasuries to buy in all the stuff, these patriot bonds, stuff like that. I mean, I think they could have an asset sale No, I think you could see. I mean, it's like it's gonna be a sad day when they start auctioning off Mount Rushmore. No, I mean, but I mean, it's like that's the kind of stuff. I mean, you when you think about it, like how much money would like the tech billionaires pay for like to be able to like build some house like in the middle of like some pristine place in like Yellowstone or Yosemite or or like at the top of like George Washington's eyebrow at Mount
The
Rushmore or
activists
something like
might
that.
buy it and destroy it to
Yeah,
finally get back
but
at the.
if you auction that stuff up, then the U.S. has a lot of assets. The U.S. government has a lot of assets, so they start auctioning that stuff off. But that's going to be a sad day when they start having to do that. So I mean, there's ways they can grab for cash. There are assets on the books, but it's a problem. Those are the types of things that they're going to have to do out of desperation because they refuse to take this problem seriously for so long, and there's going to be consequences because of that. Looking back, people are going to look back to the leadership in our time. I mean, not just today, but I mean, going back to the last administration and the one before, Trump's first administration, Obama's administration, George W. Bush, et cetera. People are going to go back to all that leadership over the past 25 years and say, why didn't you do something about it? Why did you just keep making it worse? And that's, they're going to be right. They're going to be right. That's going to be a legitimate gripe.
But you think the way that most people are going to feel this crisis is inflation? Most normal people.
100%. And it was interesting to see Jamie Dimon agree with that. He said very clearly, like, I see the future as inflationary. He's talking about fiscal deficits that, excuse me, that have to be monetized by central banks, and that creates inflation. So that's what we see coming. That's what Jamie Dimon sees coming. That's what Regalio sees coming. I mean, this is unless something happens, it's kind of not really an if question, but a when question.
So does that make you one of the guys shilling gold?
No, I
The
mean,
the Wall
I don't
Street
have
Journal
I don't have
article.
a gold business.
Well, I'm joking around, but
Maybe I
the Wall
should have,
Street
but
Journal article saying that the only people that care about the debt and the deficit are shilling gold. And we have been talking about gold for a long time, but not from this fanatical like perspective. It's just
I'm not a gold bug. I always say I'm not a gold bug. I just understand it rationally, right? And so you see what's happening right now. Foreign governments and central banks are taking their money out of US dollars because they're losing confidence in America. They're losing confidence in the US government. And so they're saying, why would I continue to own US government securities? That makes no sense. This is crazy. I'm going to get 4% loaning money to the most indebted government in the history of the world that can't get its act together, that keeps threatening me, that keeps doing all these things. No, I'm out. I'm done. And so what do? They sell those government bonds, or they just they let them mature and they take the money. And now they're sitting on, instead of US government bonds, now they're sitting on US dollars, right? They traded those bonds for dollars. Now they got to trade. They said, what do we do with the dollars? And so there are very few assets that they could buy which are sort of universally recognized, that have value, that have the ability to move, are large enough markets that you can move billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in and out of that market. And one of the only ones you can do that with is gold, right? Sure, you can buy European government bonds, but that might be a kind of a out of the frying pan and into the fire situation. It's like people would go, oh yeah, let's go buy Italian government bonds right now because that's a safe bet. And like nobody's going to do that, right? I mean, people doing that to a degree, but they go, I mean, there's only so many German government bonds you can buy. There's only so many, British government bonds, et cetera. And so they buy gold because gold has no counterparty risk, right? Gold, something that they take it, they store it in their vaults, and they know that they're going to be able to get rid of it. They know they're going to be able to sell it. They know they're going to be able to trade it. And they don't have to trust any other government, any other country, anywhere in the world. And that's, if you understand that, doesn't make you a gold bug. It just makes you just understand why it makes sense as a supranational financial reserve asset. That's what, it's not a bug. It's a supranational financial reserve asset. That's what it is. And if you understand that, then you can understand why so many central banks around the world, so many foreign governments are taking their money out of US government bonds, out of US dollars, and they buy gold, right? And so there are other strategic ads. They'll buy silver, they'll probably buy copper, they might buy uranium. I think they'll buy platinum. They'll turn it into things that they actually need. They'll take those dollars and they'll trade dollars for resources that they can use, that they can stockpile, things that, probably aren't going to go bad, things that aren't going to just rot. And so, I mean, they're probably not going to buy, mountains and mountains of like corn or, I don't know, different things like that. They're going to buy like metals, they'll buy energy, things they can store, oil, this sort of stuff. And those are things that I think make a lot of sense, because if you look at inflationary times, those sorts of resources tend to make a lot of sense. They tend to do very, very well.
It's interesting too, though, that if they're going to secure these strategic assets, do any of these governments or central banks invest in the actual mines? Why wouldn't they? Does China own actual
They
mines to
will. They
pull?
do. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure. Yeah. They will. They don't. But they don't buy. They'll buy full out production. Right. They'll buy a mine, or they'll monopolize the royalties on those mines, or they'll set up. They'll fund one of their to some local company to go out and secure the rights to those mines. They'll take a Chinese company and say, here, take this money, go to Africa, get that mine, and sell us back all of this. Iron ore, nickel, whatever it is that you're getting out of that. So yeah, they'll definitely do that, but they're not buying stocks. They're not, like the Chinese government, the CIC, Temasek, the sovereign wealth funds, all these things. They're not, like these guys. They'll go out. Well, sovereign wealth funds will buy stocks, but central banks, they're not going to go out to like the London Stock Exchange and go, oh, there's a great, there's a great super undervalued, platinum producer. Let's get into that. They don't do that. Right? They don't do that. They're buying physical resources, or they're buying production assets that they can actually own and control, but they're not buying stocks. And so that's where we've been saying this for a long time, that there's a huge disconnect. Gold keeps going to all-time highs, and yet a lot of gold miners are really, really cheap. And this is the case with, frankly, a lot of resource companies are very, very undervalued right now. And we've been saying this for a long time, that disconnect is not going to last. And it started to change. You start seeing a lot of, this is why, companies like Barrick and Newmont, et cetera, they've done extremely well. They've done extremely well. There's still a lot of smaller companies, and this is kind of where we play. Our research focuses on smaller companies, that some of these, a lot of the companies that we've recommended are up, 20, 30, 40%. This one I think is up. We recommended in premium at some point last year. That's up like 3x.
yeah. Since
Since we
last
recommend
August,
since last
that one
August.
that
Yeah.
you're talking about is 3x, but 20% of that was in the last month. It's up
Right.
20% in just the last month.
Right.
After we
Right. So
mentioned
that's
it again, because this was the one that had such a crazy low multiple, even after doubling, it was
right.
still
It
just
was still
pulling
undervalued.
in. Yeah.
Yeah, still undervalued. And I would look at a lot of these and say the stock prices are up, but they're still I think a lot of these are still very undervalued. Gold companies, silver companies, energy companies, whatever, platinum, uranium, copper, iron. There's a lot of these, strategic resources that matter. And a lot of these companies are undervalued. And in my view, I think that's a really good way to play this stuff, because again, what's driving, you have to look at capital flows, and you've got a lot of money that's leaving the United States, it's leaving the US bond market, it's just leaving the US economy in general, and it's making its way into raw materials and resources. And yeah, that includes gold. The Wall Street Journal doesn't want to acknowledge it. They make fun of people who buy gold, that understand gold as this supranational reserve asset. And yet this is like one of the best performing assets in the world. It's astonishing me. It's like they just don't want to they don't want to elevate this conversation, say, wow, this is really critical, this is really important. They're doing a tremendous disservice to the United States, to people across the United States. Their job is supposed to be a watchdog, is supposed to be an educator, and is the preeminent financial publication of the world. Honestly, it's amazing to me that they're not sounding the alarm more than they really are.
Well, and it's such an opportunity too, because on the one hand, you have this looming inflation, which is going to be such a problem for so many people. But the resources that you're talking about are still so undervalued. And is the idea that if you get in now, and then all this wealth is going to pile into it, because it's still only been like 1% of the reserves that foreign governments and central banks are holding in dollars, that has moved out of that into other assets. So is the idea that there's just going to be this wave into these other resources, and if you get in now, you're just going to...
It's a little more than 1%, but if you look at all the US dollar, this is just US government bonds, right? Not US dollar assets, but just US government bonds that are owned by foreign governments and central banks. How much of that has made its way into the gold market? Couple percent. That's it, right? So just imagine if like 2%, 3%, imagine that just becomes 6, 8%, 10%. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money going into these assets. And what does that do to the gold price? What does that do to all these other, asset prices? What does that do for the companies that are making those? We talk about a company that like has a locked in gold price of $1,000. So what happens, gold's, $3,300, $3,400, $3,500. They're making a killing. What happens if there's even more money? What happens if foreign central bank resources, if another 2% of foreign central bank reserve assets go into the gold market. What does that do to the gold price? What does that do to that company's bottom line? How much money are they making now? And how high should their stock price go? And how cheap is it today relative to that? I mean, that's the opportunity I think that exists right now. We've been talking about this for a while. People that, I mean, people that paid attention to that, again, I mean, just this one company is like are up 3x, and there's a whole lot of others. I'm not, I mean, I'm saying this because I think this opportunity, I mean, I say this opportunity is real. We've been saying this opportunity is real. It is real. Track record is very clear on this. And, I think there's more, I think there's a lot more legs in this. I think we're kind of still in early stages. And all I can say is that I sincerely hope that this chorus of very prominent people continues to grow and gets louder and louder. And if it gets so loud that it really starts to become a national conversation, I might shift gears and say, you know what, maybe it's time to actually take some money out of, lock in some of these gains, take some money out of this sector and start doing some other things if they start taking it seriously and recognize that the United States is heading for a complete and total fiscal disaster. At the moment, I don't see that happen.
Thanks for your insights, James.
Okay, bud.